Good morning. I hope that you are all doing well. Welcome to our next week exploring whether or not gifted education is a right or a privilege. Before I introduce our activity for this week, I wanted to recap some things from our discussion board. As I warned you before we started this module, I think it's the most challenging, mainly because it makes me really mad. As several of you guys mentioned in your discussion post, and I believe it was Maddie who even said, my instinct is to say, of course it's everyone's right to have these kind of gifted services. We all are educators. You are all taking this class, hopefully because you have a desire and a passion for serving gifted students. So, of course, we're tempted to say, well, yes, all students deserve a right to these gifted education services. But as we are investigating the actual laws that protect our students who are so bright and gifted, we notice that there's a definite breakdown. A theme that I'm seeing among all of the discussion posts, which I totally agree with, is a lack of accountability. So the issue with gifted education is at a federal level across all states, we don't have a lot of agreement about what giftedness is, and we definitely have honestly no support in terms of monetary support to provide these gifted services to our students. So providing gifted education is a state by state responsibility. Beyond what's called the Javits grant, we don't have any federal support in terms of monetary support for gifted students. The Javits grant I would encourage you to look into. That is a grant that's mainly focused on underrepresented populations. We'll look at that again in our module on the invisible gifted. But as I've noticed you guys kind of understanding through your discussion posts, it just does not simply seem like that's enough. So what happens is we have this federal recognition of the importance of educating our gifted students, but then we don't have much accountability. So then we leave everything to the states. And as we leave everything to the states, I think it was Deanna who she just did a really good job unpacking the lack of accountability. So then within the states, we have differences in our districts. And then within our districts, we have differences in our schools. So what's happening is, as a whole, we all agree that it is important that we educate the gifted, but then we don't really have a mechanism to make sure that this is happening. So I do think it's important that we establish this lack of a federal law that's really protecting our gifted students, but I also don't want to leave this discussion on a negative note. I think that the most important thing that we can do in terms of serving the gifted is to raise awareness. So several of you all mentioned, we're serving our students with disabilities. Many of you mentioned free and appropriate education. We're making sure that all students with disabilities have the same access to learning as students who are more in a traditional classroom. And a lot of the reasoning behind that is because students with disabilities are at times easier to recognize, and at times they are easier to understand. Usually when we think of gifted students, we don't think they need our help, which, as we've seen in our previous studies of concomitant problems, they definitely do. So with these gifts come new challenges. So number one, we don't recognize that they need help in the first place. And even more importantly, we often do not recognize these students. So there is a definite lack of accountability. Part of that is due to a lack of clarity in the law in terms of who's responsible for what. It's also due to the fact that we all define giftedness differently. So while there is a federal definition of giftedness, state by state, that definition is going to vary. One note within South Carolina, so South Carolina does provide some monetary support for gifted education. However, there's some caveats to that. One thing that South Carolina does that I'm actually a very big fan of is called local identification. So with local identification, we identify the students within our district who may not meet our state definition of giftedness, but locally where they are the brightest students in that one district that we are investigating. So with local identification, we can change the ways that we identify, and then the theory is that we will support the best that we have in this one area in hopes that we can help them reach their fullest potential. I'm a huge fan of local identification because all students are different. It's hard to have this one definition of giftedness because I think in that we are kind of forgetting the contextual nature of education, and we can't do a one-size-fits-all approach to education, so we probably shouldn't do a one-size-fits-all approach to identification. The issue with that in South Carolina, if districts choose local identification, they lose the monetary funding. So any type of monetary funding from South Carolina for gifted education services has to be based on the statewide identification procedures. If we choose to go for local identification, then they lose that funding. So the issue of identification is huge because that's going to impact our services. I also want us to think about the potential social and emotional factors that are going on. Imagine being a student who was born in South Carolina, identified as gifted, then you move to North Carolina, maybe you're not identified as gifted. So the fact that this is a state-by-state issue comes with a lot of potential social and emotional issues as well as academic issues. Along with the theme of raising awareness, I think this is a good segue into your activity for the week. So throughout the years that I have taught this course, which I should rather say semesters, this is just my second year at Winthrop, but I have taught similar courses at other universities, I have been experimenting with an assignment for this. So this is just the second time that I've done this activity for this particular week of the module. So I would appreciate your feedback on it. But my goal for this week is for you all to shift from being students to being activists. So how are you going to actively share your knowledge with whether you are a pre-service teacher, with your other students in your pre-service education, other students in the Winthrop College of Education. If you are a parent, how will you share this information with other parents? If you are a practicing teacher, how will you share this information with other practicing teachers? I want you to think about how can we communicate this knowledge that we are gaining in the class to others who may or may not know what's going on. So the key to really good gifted education is understanding who the gifted are. If we continue to work as if gifted students just fit our stereotype of the well-behaved students who are always in the front row of the classroom, we are going to be missing a lot of students. Several of you mentioned that it is the responsibility of not just teachers, but also administrators and also parents and also even peers to be able to support one another. So when we think about shared accountability, your challenge for this week is to think, how can I share this information in a way that is practical and that is tangible for my peers? So for this week, you have a little bit more of a creative assignment, which is good because I feel like this previous discussion post was pretty heavy. So your assignment is to make a flyer that is basically trying to sell the importance of gifted education. So within one page or two, so you can do a front and back if you'd like, I want you to make a flyer that is advertising the importance of serving the gifted and talented. Within this flyer, and this is all on Blackboard and in your rubric, I need you to cover 4 things, okay? So number 1, who are the gifted in the first place? Now, we've studied various definitions of the gifted. So this is your challenge. What definition do you want to propose? Or do you want to propose several? Or would you rather use an approach that more looks at characteristics of the gifted and not just one definition? But number 1, who are the gifted? Number 2, what are some common myths concerning the gifted? So is it us understanding that maybe gifted students are not always curious about what we want them to be curious about? Maybe it's, well, we're starting to understand that gifted students can often be misbehaving in the classroom. Whatever most common myths you think others would need to know. Number 3, do gifted students really require differentiated services? Aren't they just the smartest kids? Why do we even need to help them? Why shouldn't we focus on the students who are struggling? Convince me why we are required to give them differentiated services. And finally, number 4, how can we support these students? So as an educator, how can I support my gifted students? As a parent, how can I support my potential gifted students? So think about your audience. You can focus on parents of the gifted if you'd like. If you would like to focus more heavily on gifted, or not gifted, but rather general education teachers, that is okay as well. But your challenge is really to shift from here's all of this heavy, important information to how can I capture this really quickly and share it with my peers. So again, you're making a flyer. It can be 1 to 2 pages. I'm not looking for a paper here. I want this to be visually captivating. I want it to be like you could hang it in the teacher's workroom. You could hang it on a bulletin board and someone would actually look at it. So within that, you're covering 4 things. Who are the gifted? What are some common myths concerning the gifted? Do gifted students really require differentiated services? And how can we support them? As always, please be sure to review your rubric before submitting the assignment. I'm looking forward to seeing how you approach this assignment. I think that it's important to remember all of these laws and all of the kind of politics that goes behind gifted education, but this is your chance to take an active role. When we talk about accountability in your discussion posts, I was happy to see that you all were frustrated in that. So hopefully this assignment will give you the opportunity to begin to advocate for the needs of our gifted and talented students. As always, I'm here to help, and I'm quite willing to meet with you in person or via the phone if that's easier. So please feel free to shoot me an email whenever. Have a great week.